Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transformed their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Today, we have an extraordinary guest who brings a wealth of experience from both the military and corporate worlds. Meet Walt Morgan, who not only piloted a Navy helicopter, but also navigated the complex terrain of leadership development. As we explore his journey, we'll uncover the challenges, triumphs, and insights that have defined his path from cockpit to corporate. This episode promises to be a compelling exploration of leadership, resilience, and the unique challenges faced by veterans transitioning to civilian careers. So buckle up for an inspiring conversation that will leave you thinking about the power of adaptability and purpose in shaping our careers and lives. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Walt Morgan, a distinguished senior leadership coach and leadership consultant with Translational Lift Coaching. Walt's journey is a remarkable one. As a retired Navy helicopter pilot, he transitioned from a life of military service to becoming a passionate advocate for leadership development. His mission is to raise our collective leadership capacity, one leader at a time. Walt's unique blend of experiences, ranging from his role as a leadership professor in the Navy to his work as an integral coach and adjunct lecturer at the University of Colorado, offers a rich background of insights. And he has dedicated his career to supporting veterans and helping them leverage their unparalleled skills in the civilian workforce. Today, he's going to be sharing his perspectives on the diversity of veteran experiences, the emotional aspects of military separation, and the powerful impact veterans can have in the corporate world. So please join me in welcoming Walt Morgan to the show.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Anytime the word remarkable is used in an introduction for me, I appreciate it. That's very kind. And thank you for having me here. And thank you for the service that you offer through the conversations that you have on this podcast, because I think they're remarkable, Brian. No, but truly, you have these really important conversations, the human side of work, in ways that we don't always grapple with. So I think you offer an amazing service there. So thank you.
No, thank you. And what I love about when we first got introduced is there's an angle here that I haven't had an opportunity to explore just yet, in that veteran side, moving into the civilian space. And so I love kind of the work that you're doing, not only just in the leadership space overall, but that bringing it from the veteran lens, I think is something that's important. And I was very excited to have you on. And so kind of speaking a little bit to that, can you kind of tell us a little bit about your journey from Navy helicopter pilot now to becoming a leadership coach?
So I always wanted to fly helicopters. And I say always. There's a picture that hangs in my childhood room, which is on a ranch in Oregon. And it's a picture I drew when I was 5. And it says, when I grow up, I want to be a helicopter pilot. And there's a horrible picture of a helicopter, but I was 5, so I give myself a little bit of grace there. And whatever was manifested when I drew that picture was important to me. Because yes, I wanted to become a bunch of other things probably when I was growing up, but there was something really grounding about being a helicopter pilot. And so many of my imaginings and hopes were really linked to that. So I went to college on a Navy scholarship and then went to flight school after I got commissioned. So when you go to flight school in the Navy, you don't really know what you're going to fly eventually. I went through during this jet draft. Everything was F-18s. Everybody who had the grades was expected to go fly F-18s. And I did well in flight school, but I just knew that I was supposed to be a helicopter pilot. There's just something that was authentic and true and real. And by the way, I was the only one. It's not like a popular choice. Like a lot of people go to flight school with these ambitions of flying jets, but something wasn't right about that for me. It would have been great if I'd pursued that path. But I actually had to have some real conversations with some senior people just to become a helicopter pilot. I was in the Navy for 23 years. I retired as a commander. It was so much better than I could have ever even hoped it was. My love and passion around flying, completing missions, training, helping others become better as pilots, even as I became better. It was just everything it was supposed to be. Everything that 5-year-old could have hoped for is really what happened. I truly, truly feel so grateful that I was able to pursue that path.
No, that's awesome. And when you left the Navy and then became a leadership coach, what kind of inspired that transition? Or was it something that was occurring while you were still in the Navy?
When I was in the Navy, again, was very, very good to me. And I'm very grateful for all of my Navy experiences, even though sometimes in the day to day, I didn't fully grasp that. My final opportunity in the Navy, my final job, my final posting, my final role was here at the University of Colorado in Boulder, which is also my alma mater. And I was sent here to be the executive officer of the Naval ROTC program. And I won't go into it. What ROTC is generally, I think, completely misunderstood. It's not a place where we recruit. It's a place where people who earn scholarships and are very, very high achieving come. And then it's a leadership development program that allows them to serve in the fleet as officers and fulfill their scholarship. There's another role, and that's the role as professor. So when you come to the university, you're also a professor teaching leadership and management courses. So yes, I absolutely loved being part of the leadership development program with some remarkable young people who are called to serve and to support them in their growth so that they could go do important things and lead Marines and sailors. Like that was a critical part of the job that I really enjoyed. And where I got really excited, Brian, was in the classroom as a professor. Like up to that point, I thought I had leadership figured out. I had been designated to be in charge of those teams, and sometimes in some hard circumstances. Those teams always had success. I was pretty good at building relationships. I invested in sailors. And so I'm like, okay, leadership, I've got it figured out. I've got this down. And when I got into the study of leadership, it became very, very clear to me very, very quickly how incomplete my story of leadership was. All of the places where I wasn't seeing leadership, it was all around me and I couldn't see it because I hadn't really expanded my understanding of it. And a lot of places where I thought I was seeing leadership happen, I probably wasn't. And it became reflective around my own journey. The places where I thought I'd had success maybe was more complicated, complex, contextual, situational, and maybe there are other contributions around that I hadn't fully seen before. So as I looked back on my own leadership journey, sure, I saw some successes and I saw some impact, but I also saw some opportunities to grow, some significant opportunities to grow. All of this wrapped up in this role where I got to be this professor and explore leadership with my students. And I always go back because I'm still teaching at the university. I still teach leadership courses. It's 12 years later now. And I go back to that very, very first semester where I had no idea, nothing, right? And I almost feel like that was my best semester because I was on this journey truly of exploration, truly humble, like, I don't know, like I'm supposed to be some sort of authority here. And I really, really don't know. So 4 years of teaching leadership, the first 4 years, active duty, teaching leadership at the university, initially to naval officer candidates, midshipmen, and Marine Corps. But then civilians started showing up in class. At the end of 4 years, like a third of my class were civilians, and they added so much insight and richness to the class. And so it came time to retire. I chose to retire. The theme of your podcast, Why I Left, I didn't have to retire then, but I'd made my time at 23 years. I was eligible to retire. I was in a place I wanted to be. And I felt that I'd reached a point where my growth and contribution and impact would be amplified outside of the military. So that's how I made that decision to leave at that time. But now I always assumed that I'd fly forever. That's where my passion was. That's what I was skilled at. That's what I loved to do. But I was at a crossroads. And I think every separating veteran is at the same crossroads. Do I go to a place where everybody knows who I am? My squadron mates are in the airlines, or they're in defense contracting or defense consulting to a large degree. So do I go to the airlines? They know who I am there. Do I go, Commander Morgan, we know exactly who you are. Here's your desk. Here's your desk at the Defense Contract Agency right here. You sit here for the next 20 years. Or do I go someplace where they don't know who I am and forge an entirely new path? And I was so excited about my experience in the teaching of leadership. I thought, man, there's something here. There's something about leadership development. And I opened myself to the universe and I felt the nudge. Like you're supposed to be doing something in leadership development. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that meant. But I said, okay, leadership development it is. And I put those words at the top of my LinkedIn page, Walt Morgan, leadership development specialist, waited for the job offers to roll in. Whew, they didn't,
I was about
right?
to say, how'd
And
that work
yeah,
out?
no. I applied for a bunch of those LinkedIn jobs that I found interesting, and none of those panned out or worked. But in one case where I didn't get an interview, I circled back. I'm like, hey, recruiter, help me understand why I didn't get an interview for this job. I feel well suited for it. And she said, yeah, this is a leadership development position. And you are in the military where there is no leadership. So we didn't consider you. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's what I'm up against here. I think that was her view. It's probably pretty unique. But I'm like, man, I feel pretty misunderstood here. Um, Finally, this wonderful Fortune 200 healthcare company took a chance on me and brought me on board. And I'm very grateful for that because their culture was what I needed. Their culture was one that was very emotionally forward. And I learned very quickly once I onboarded that I'd been emotionally negligent for decades. I'd been spiritually negligent for decades. And all of a sudden, for those first 4 years of being a leadership professor were like an exciting, steep period of growth for me cognitively and my understanding of leadership. Man, those next 3 years with this company were profound in my emotional and spiritual growth. Profound. I feel so fortunate to have had that experience in that culture. So that was an important part of my transition. Can I share a story though about
Oh, absolutely.
one of my peers? Earlier I said, hey, I chose to go someplace where nobody really knew anything about the military. One of my peers said, isn't it nice to be here where everybody's kind to each other, except in the military or instead of the military? And I'm like, I was triggered, right? Because everybody I
Yeah.
loved was in the military. In the military, the underlying assumption, whether right or wrong, is that we're all willing to die for each other. And everybody is very kind here. Everybody's been very friendly, but I haven't exactly gotten a willing to die for me vibe just yet. And nor did I ever. It was a great company, but there is a profound, profound sense of connection that many of us find in the military that is so hard to replicate. And when we can't replicate that outside the military, it can be very, there's a strong sense of loss often emerges.
No, definitely. And when you think about your role as this adjunct lecturer at Colorado, what's the impact that you aim to make through this leadership studies program, these leadership development programs?
Yeah. So, one, I want to be clear about the role that is in my life. Like, that's a hobby, right? I'm an adjunct lecturer as a hobby of impact, if you will. There's probably a number of reasons why I left that involved family and being on the road all the time. One of the big reasons I left is the leadership programs that I was doing for this company, a lot of the times were 3, 4 day programs. And then I was gone. And I I felt not ready to leave the process of the leadership development. 3 and 4 days wasn't enough. I wanted to be part of a sustained transformation that I couldn't really do there. I felt very much part of powerful experiences and powerful learnings, but not necessarily transformation, because that's not enough time to truly grow into something new, into a new way. And so, one of the things that I really enjoy, to answer your question, about teaching at the university is I'm with 30 students for 15 weeks. I get to explore leadership with 30 students for 15 weeks in ways that they probably wouldn't think about leadership or explore leadership without that opportunity. And so that's what I like about it, is that it's sustained, it's over time. And some of the students will really have profound experiences in that coursework. Some won't. That's okay. It's all an invitation, right? For those that are ready to grow, to really think about leadership and to identify as leaders. Here's an opportunity to be together. So that's why I do it.
No, I love that. And now I saw something that you've experienced with integral coaching, right? So how has your experience with integral coaching influenced your approach to leadership coaching?
So when I was at this corporate company, they sent me to Integral Coaching up in Canada. ICC, Integral Coaching Canada, were the founders of the integral methodology. Some of your listeners may be familiar with Ken Wilber and integral theory. Integral coaching was a powerful grassroots movement that arose from Ken Wilber's integral theory in a very, very applied way in coaching. And I'll be honest, it's the most perfect thing I've ever found. I think I've been studying and practicing integral coaching for 7 years now, and it just keeps growing with me. As I grow and evolve, integral coaching just unfolds in front of me. To me, it's this amazing thing that allows me to serve my coaching clients really, really powerfully. Having said that, not every client is ready for integral coaching. So I'm also an executive coach. And the two really meet in the middle. Really, what integral coaching is about is a journey to a new way of being. When I say way of being, by the way, I'm talking about a belief system that creates behaviors, that has a unique way of checking for success. That's a way of being. And what happens is we have these ways of being, like maybe a belief system that says, hey, if I give enough, then I'll be accepted by my community. And so that person just gives and gives and gives, always seeking acceptance. So that's an example of a way of being. And that way of being might have served them for decades. It might have helped them grow and get promotions and be successful and have a beautiful family. But sometimes, we often start butting up against the edges of these ways of being. We outgrow them. And so when people are ready for a new way of being, they're in kind of a painful place. They start doubling down on what used to work. It's not working anymore. I coach a lot of corporate VPs, and this is really the place where that happens. Like everything that used to work for them, like if I work the hardest, or if I'm the most organized, if I have the most control, usually starts working when somebody's a VP, because the transition from something tactical to something strategic is so abrupt that it's really jarring for corporate VPs. So that's a place I like to coach for that. This way of being isn't working anymore, and they need a new way of being, and integral coaching is perfect for that. It's this really important, profound journey for people who are ready to go on that journey to move into a new way of being. And when they have it, 20 new important behaviors just kind of emerge organically, and they feel more confident in ambiguity. They feel more comfortable in their lives. They feel more balanced. They create better relationships. All these important things happen, and integral coaching is a really amazing way to get there. Not every client wants that. Some clients like, I feel pain right here and I want help with that pain right here. Like, okay, let's explore that pain, understand it, and help you move through it. I can do that too. So integral coaching allows me to meet my most complex clients who are ready exactly where they are. My executive, so I have this full spectrum of being able to meet people where they are. But I like to say that until I've done the work, I can't invite others to do the work. So I can only take clients as far as I've been. So I'm constantly working on myself so that I can hold that space for somebody else's journey. So that's the value of integral for me. It really allows me to serve my clients deeply.
No, I love that. And, as I mentioned in our kind of opening, you being a veteran is really important. And I think about the transition that often occurs. So, from your perspective, what are some of those unique skills and experiences that veterans can bring to the civilian workforce that are often underappreciated? And I think about your LinkedIn comment, like her saying there's no leadership in the military doesn't make much sense. You're right. I don't think that's a prevailing thought, but the fact that that was even mentioned, that's puzzling, to be honest. But would love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, one, I think it's important to understand that veterans are not a monolithic thing. If you've met one veteran, Brian, you've met one veteran, right? Every single one is unique. What service are they from? Are they from the Coast Guard, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Army? Those services have these really macro cultures that provide impactful experiences that shape us. So when I work with somebody, like when I was still active duty, working with somebody on a major staff from the Army, I was weird to them and they were weird to me because we developed as our military selves in very different cultures. So just understanding that services themselves have different cultures. And then we do a job in those services that also really shape us, and a pilot's not a grunt, isn't a lawyer, isn't a, chem bio specialist, isn't like we all do these unique jobs that are fundamentally develop us in certain ways. And it's all different. If you come from submarines in the Navy, it's very, very different than coming from aviation. Distinct cultures, distinct ways of thinking and doing. Um, and then there's the rank thing. Like how, were you an officer? Were you enlisted? There's no judgment about either of those, but it definitely influences how we show up and how we identify in our service and how senior we are in those ranks and roles are important. And then how long were we in? Like I got out at 23. I was very much on the edge of being untrainable when I left because I'd been doing that for so long, right? But if somebody gets out at 5 years, 10 years, man, they're in a very, very different place of readiness for something new than I was. Like I was an old dog trying to learn new tricks. And then finally, there's the human themselves. Each person is unique, complex, different, and they bring themselves. Okay, so the veteran is not a monolithic thing. And getting to know your veteran and how they are shaped and who they are and is, I think, important rather than just assuming veteran. And as a trend, something I would say about veterans in general is that we're pretty good in ambiguity. We're really good at ambiguity. Like we're willing to take action and commit to decisions in ambiguity. I talk to very senior C-suite members from big corporations as part of my work. And they're like, yeah, building strategy is not the hard part. Like we can imagine strategy. We're smart enough to do that. The hardest thing about strategy is enacting it. The hardest thing about strategy is finding people who are willing enough to take risk, willing to push the face of uncertainty and just lean into action and get things done. Well, okay, because I know people who do that really well, as a group. And I think that's something really important that the veterans bring to the workplace. Move into action and ambiguity.
No, I love that. And you mentioned the difference between someone separating at 23 years and maybe 5 years. And I've seen in some of your work, there's this powerful, I guess, regardless of time, right? But powerful emotional event of military separation, right? That is probably like and I guess it's a common emotion. I guess you keep me honest here, but when you're leaving the military, can you elaborate on maybe some of these experiences and how you address them in your own coaching?
Yeah, such a good question, Brian. Thank you. So here's something that happened in my own life. I was just a couple weeks away from separating from the Navy after 23 years. And all of a sudden I felt an incredible pain in my back, knee, and leg. Is almost as if I'd been stabbed in my lower back, stabbed in my knee, and there's just this rope of fire that went in between those two things. And it wasn't the normal pain. It was a new pain, something I never experienced before. It was the nerve pain and the full spectrum of nerve pain from that like dull throbbing to the quick buzzy. It's just all of it was there and represented. And the result of that is I couldn't walk. I couldn't be upright for more than 3 minutes at a time. How do you shower? How do you shave? How do you show up for life if you can't be upright for more than 3 minutes at a time? It was really, really scary. I got an MRI as soon as this happened. The MRI said, look, or the doctor said, look, you have some bulging discs. We don't want to do surgery, but it's probably inevitable. Like, okay. And And this went on for months. After the first month, my right leg completely atrophied to a toothpick. It disappeared. My right leg just disappeared, gone.
Wow.
And even if I was up for like 3 minutes and trying to walk, my leg would drag behind me and I just didn't have control over it. And it was really scary. And I was heading for surgery. Now we're 2 months into this event, starting to schedule the surgery. A friend of mine dropped a book on my doorstep. And the name of the book was Healing Back Pain by a guy named Dr. Sarno. I read the book and said, look, this thing that you're going through, knucklehead, he didn't say knucklehead. Those are my words. It's not a physical event. Your doctor's going to tell you that you have bulging discs, but that's not what this is. This is an emotional event. And the first step you do is you just say, accept that. Press I believe. This is an emotional event. And he had a couple of other steps. He never even told us that we had to discover what the emotional event was specifically. We just had to accept it. I'm like, why would I be going through an emotional event? I truly, genuinely didn't understand why I would be going through an emotional event at that time. So I read the book in one day. I mean, what else was I going to do? I was just lying around. And it was the next day or 2 days later, 3 days later, I was able to take our dog for a 15-minute walk. I remember sitting, I pass it all the time still, this little wall that I had to sit on just halfway through. But that was everything. Just to be able to do a 15-minute walk was so unimaginable to me based on my last 2 months. And then it's probably a week or so after that, I hiked Panoramic Loop. I just walked out our front door and did this walk here in Boulder. It's like a 3.4-mile hike, and I was slow, but I did it. And it was maybe a week after that, week or two, I put on a Camelback, walked out the front door and said, I don't know. I don't know where I end up, but I'm just going. And 4 hours later, I was standing on top of Green Mountain. And normally a 2-hour hike. But 4 hours later, I was standing on Green Mountain, just out our front door and back home. And then a month after that, I strapped on a 55-pound backpack and headed into the wilderness for a week. And I still didn't understand what was this emotional event. Here's what it was. My time in the military, I like to say, look, I don't care about my rank. I don't care about the medals on my chest. All I care about is taking care of sailors and getting the job done. But here's the truth, Brian. I was lying to myself. That was crap, right? I did care about the rank. That was my identity. I did care about the medals on my chest. I also cared about taking care of sailors and getting the job done. But the loss of my identity was terrifying to me. And I was doing a corporate veterans program. And after I told the same story I just told you, he approached me. He said, I'm so glad you told that story. I just retired. He was a senior chief in the Navy. He was a really impressive human being. I was flying out here for this program, and I was at the kiosk in the airport, and it asked me if I was an active duty service member or not. And it was a yes, no question. He said, I froze. He said, I don't know how long I stood there, but I couldn't make myself say no because we have so much identity. Every single service has this amazing thing that they can do. I'll talk to the Navy because that's the service I know the best. We have a carrier, an aircraft carrier, right? Guess what's on this carrier? We have multiple nuclear power plants. They have to be run and maintained and all these things. They're nuclear power plants. And we have a whole bunch of ordnance, really explosive things that have to be maintained and operated and loaded and managed and moved. And we have all the other services that are required. We have 5,000 people, and most of them are under the age of 22, the large majority of them. We operate in a threat environment, in an uncertain meteorological environment, and in coordination with other really impressive assets. And we also are an airport launching jets and recovering jets. And guess what? When we're recovering jets on the carrier, when things are going well, a jet's landing every 17 seconds. So that's an ongoing process that we don't talk about enough. And so the reason this works is everybody is given a specific role and they play that role. But when we go out on deployments, doesn't matter what service you're in, we don't often call each other by our real names for 6 months at a time, right? We call each other by the job we do. right? Hey, Chang, which is chief engineer, or boss, which is air boss, or skipper, or chief, or AM2, or OPSO, right? You just call each other by your function. We are our job in the military, and it's a beautiful thing because that's what makes it work. But it's not so beautiful when you leave the military and we're totally disconnected with who we are because we had to sacrifice that to be who we needed to be in this important job. It's my observation that we are probably disproportionately attached to the identity of our job, at least at the time we transition. So that's what I was going through, right? I think it's the emotional impact that many service members go through. Who am I if I'm not air boss? Who am I if I'm not Commander Morgan? Who am I if I'm not senior chief? We don't know. And it's very, very scary.
No, I can only imagine. It's a perfect segue into this advice section where when I think about this, right, and I think about the gentleman you were telling me who came to the conference, for veterans who are considering either voluntarily or truthfully, it may not be voluntary, it's just mandated that it's time for a career transition for them. What advice would you give them to leverage their military experience effectively in the corporate world?
Leverage the network. We have this idea that if we apply for these online job links that we see, that's the path to getting a job. I don't know anybody. Do you know anybody that's ever gotten a job by like clicking on a link and applying?
Randomly, there have been a couple, but it's rare. It is
It's
very
rare.
rare.
And it's probably even rarer, I would guess, for service members because it's so hard to articulate our
Yes.
military experience.
Yes.
So, the first advice I would give is be engaged in that network. Don't be afraid to ask for help, but be authentic and sincere in that network, and be able to articulate what it was that you did. Because the way we're going to get jobs as transitioning service members is when somebody says, "Oh, I I hear you have this job. I know somebody," and it doesn't look exactly like that, but it doesn't matter because they would be perfect for the job. Guess what? When corporations put parameters around what they're hiring for, they don't know what they want. They have to create something that's close enough that allows them to be selective, right? They just create a selective process that may or may not get the right person for that job. But when we network, we allow people to advocate for us and actually help us find that right fit and to show up with all these incredible skills that we learn as veterans, the adaptability that we bring to just show up in that job. So to crush that network, lean into the network. Don't worry about the people and reaching out.
No, I love that. Now, flip it a little bit. When you think about the orgs now, what steps can organizations take to better support that integration and advancement of veteran employees to make sure that they're harnessing that full potential of their leadership and teamwork skills?
Yeah. So, well, one, I think there's between 8 and 10 million veterans in the workforce, and there's a lot of talent represented in that. So, my first advice to organizations who are hiring is open your minds, right? Don't allow that narrow strand of experience that you create as a pathway to that job eliminate 8 million people from consideration, right? Just be open to the talent. And like I said earlier, open to these people have a history of moving into action and ambiguity and allow that to come serve you. So just be open to hiring veterans and having those conversations. And what I said earlier, veterans aren't monolithic. Find the right veterans for you, right? They're not all going to be right. And if you have a bad veteran experience, don't allow that to alter your commitment to veterans. Because like I said, when you've met one veteran, you've met one veteran. But open yourself to those 8 to 10 million people who are out there who bring value. And then after that, I think don't worry about it too much. It's just somebody that you've brought on your team. I don't think that veterans require special treatment or special tending. If there's a veteran affinity group, they're going to want to do that probably. If you have an opportunity to send them to a corporate veteran retreat, that's a really, really nice way of demonstrating, because they're demonstrating your support for veterans, because there are things that veterans will only talk about with other veterans. If you can give veterans an opportunity to connect with other veterans in a structured way. That's a nice thing to give, but mostly don't worry about it. Veterans, one theme that I think veterans bring, not all veterans, but many veterans, is adaptability. So just allow them to adapt and perform.
I like that. And when you forward looking, what impact are you hoping to have in the future?
Yeah, it's such a good question. One, I'm probably going to continue coaching executives for the rest of my life, right? It's important work. It's work that I love. So what's the other stuff? I founded a coaching program at the University of Colorado in which we support students at the university with professional leadership coaches. And we have this great group of 20 coaches that do that work. I also coach students, and this is what I found. Students, young people in their 20s, feel ready for coaching, amazing strides in their leadership growth and development through coaching. And it feels really, really important to invest in coaching the young people who are ready to be coached. Because this is what I think. I think we have all inherited some outdated notions and ideas about what leadership is. And I think it's an incomplete story. And I think we're at a place in our society where we would benefit from collectively expanding what our understanding of leadership is so that we can collectively address the things that need to be addressed and the things that matter most. And I think the way that we get there is through the development of young people. And I find that when I coach college students, their neurological pathways are wide open. They make connection, they grow very quickly, they understand things very quickly. And there's another thing I like to say about them, which is they are less rutted. And by that, I mean, man, I'm 54 years old. I've got more than 30 years in the workplace of expectations pushing me down,
Yes.
just weighing me down deep into this rut. And I'm very, very intentional about growing and changing, but it's not as easy for me as it is for somebody who's 22 to just hop out of their shallow little rut and move into a new direction. And I think that if we can change the leadership trajectory of a young person just by 1 or 2 degrees, it's just like investing, right? The sooner you do it, the more return you get. Except for the young person that we invest in their leader growth, the return isn't financial. I mean, it's probably financial too, but what it is about impact, right? The impact that they make through their lives over time because they change their trajectory as a leader young. So what's next? Next is finding a way to expand this coaching program that we started at the University of Colorado and find a way to reach other young people, whether in college or not in college, but people who feel ready to grow as leaders, who feel ready to be coached, to invest in them so that they can make a real difference.
No, I love that. And now flipping the mic a little bit, what's one question you have for me that I could potentially answer?
Yes. So I'm going to ask you a question I have never asked another human being. This is a unique Brian Aquart question. Like nobody else gets this one. I thought of it this morning because I was on a walk with our dog who's 15 and he was a rescue. I used to see those, you might have seen these, there's stickers that say, who saved who? And it's got a paw print on it. And I used
Yeah.
to see those stickers and I'd say, first off, whom? And secondly, I clearly saved that dog, right? He was in a high kill shelter. I extracted him. I saved him. And now, 11 years later, I'm not so sure about that. Like, I am so present to so many things that I have learned from him on this journey in so many important ways that he's been a guide for me. And I'm serious about that. I have grown so much because of that dog, because of that relationship. So, my question for you that's never been asked before is what have in your life you been able to learn from a pet?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. So, and I have a little guy here as well. And what I think I've learned, and this is my third dog. What I've learned from a pet, I'll talk specifically about Ghost. He's my little Boston Terrier. Is I've learned that dogs in particular are so simple, and you can learn a lot from just the simple things. As an example, I was up late the other night, couldn't sleep, And I just was like, I'm going to go take a walk. I get up, he hears the floor creak, he walks right over to the leash, because I wasn't like determined to take a walk. I was thinking, oh, I should go outside. But he was like, oh, you getting up? You going outside? Let's go outside. There's no in between. Let's go outside. Let's go for a walk. Let's get some food. Let's eat and let's sleep. And oh, when we get up, always stretch. So like you learn little things from dogs that it's like, you know what? We as humans, and I'll just speak specifically for me, sometimes we just overcomplicate things. So what I've picked up from him and truly the other dogs I've had is that at times you just need to be open and just ready to do what you feel. Now, mind you, as a human, it's got to be, tailored in certain ways, right? You can't just do everything you feel. But you want to take a walk? Let's go for a walk. You should always be ready to go for a walk. When you get up in the morning, it's important that you always stretch. Why? It just feels good. You should always stretch, right? And so I think about these little things in life and that at times we hold ourselves up from doing things for whatever reasons, right? It could be personal, it could be professional or whatever. Dogs are always kind of like ready to go. And so for me, it's like you too should be always ready to quote unquote go, whatever that means for you. In this case, if it's time for you to make a transition, be ready to go. But what do you need to do, to your point and how you likely coach people? How do you prepare for that, right? I don't know if dogs think about preparing. They're just kind of ready to go. But like you can pick up so much information and so many little positive things, but just watching how a dog lives its life. There's also a little jealousy for me as too, because I would love to sleep 8 hours a day and just kind of wake up, go get some food, go get some water, go back to sleep. Granted, can't do all that, but it's just, I think living with a dog has taught me to appreciate the simplicity of life and the little things that I shouldn't take for granted. Going for a walk, sleeping off and taking care of yourself in that way, but also just being ready to explore whatever the case is, right? Because they never ask you where you're going. They're not like a kid, right? They never ask you where you're going. You open the car door, they're ready to go, looking out the window, let's go. And then as soon as you open the door, they go out, let's go, let's walk. And so I love that about dogs. So those are the things that I've picked up from my pets, but not specifically little Ghost over here. Thank you for that. That's a great question. And you're right. I've actually never been asked that question. So I love that. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for your answer. I love your energy around that. And it sounds like you've learned a lot from Ghost and maybe some other pets along the way also.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the show. We got connected on LinkedIn. We've stayed in touch, and I appreciate you coming to share some insights and specifically that lens around veterans, right? I think that's an important topic, that transition into the workforce, into the civilian workforce for a lot of veterans is something that I appreciate you offered some insight on. And so I'd love for you to share where our listeners can find you and support some of the work you're doing.
Yeah, I just invite your listeners to reach out to me directly. I love whom you serve. So just email me, Walt at tliftcoaching.com. That's Walt, W-A-L-T, at the letter T, L-I-F-T, coaching.com. If you feel ready to grow, if you're feeling stuck, if there's something that you want to work on, reach out. Let's talk about that. I can help. And I'm excited to do so. Don't hesitate. And I feel like we're winding down, Brian. I was just getting started, but before we do close out,
Yeah.
I feel like you have a big marathon coming up.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah, we do. So I do. At the time of this recording, I'm 2 weeks out from the Chicago Marathon and probably 4 or 5 weeks out from the New York City Marathon. And it's been good. It's been a good training season. Had a big 20-mile run this past Sunday. And so now I'm in Taper Town and I'm having fun with that. But I'm very excited about the Chicago Marathon. I've raised money for a good cause, the Advocate Childhood Trauma Treatment Program, for those who have been impacted by childhood trauma, supporting their efforts in supporting those folks in need. Thank you. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I hope you have such a beautiful, challenging, and fulfilling experience, and you get everything that you hope to get out of that. So have a healthy run.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll make sure I put all your info in our show notes. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Thanks to Walt Morgan for joining. I hope you all have a great week. You picked up some great nuggets, and we'll definitely see you all next time. Walt, thanks again.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Alive Podcast Network. See you soon.